Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a special World Book Day video. I'm going to do a whole bunch of videos in celebration of World Book Day, and for today's video I want to read you a story. This is from More Stories from Shakespeare Told to the Children by Jeanie Lang, and this book does not have a copyright date in it, but from the research I've been able to do, I think it was published around 1910, around there. And so I wanted to read to you her story of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. I find it fascinating to see how people condense the story, turn it from a play into a story, and in this case, how do you tell the tragedy of Hamlet as a story for children? So I hope you enjoy this. This is Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. In a little country by the North Sea, the home of our own Queen Alexandra, long, long ago there lived a king who was very brave and good. He had one son called Hamlet and a wife whom he dearly loved. Hamlet was a clever and handsome prince with a careless, happy heart that did not like to be troubled with serious things. But Hamlet's mother was a bad woman. She was more fond of the king's wicked brother than she was of her own noble husband, and together she and this wicked man planned how they might kill the king. One day as he lay asleep in his orchard, this cruel brother came and poured poison into his ears so that he died. When his people found him lying dead, they thought that a serpent must have bitten him and killed him in his sleep. His brother became king instead of him, and in less than a month he was married to the wicked queen. Hamlet had loved his father so much that when his mother married his uncle, he was very sad and very angry. He dressed himself in the deepest black to show how he mourned his father, and would not join in any of the merrymakings that were held when the royal marriage took place. But he did not know that they had murdered his father until the king had been for some months dead. The wicked man who was now king had such a guilty mind that he never felt quite happy or safe. He was afraid that armies from Norway would invade Denmark and defeat and kill him. So he always had soldiers on guard in the city by the sea, where he lived with his false, bad queen. One dark, cold night, when the sentries were watching in front of the king's castle, a tall figure in armor walked slowly past them. It did not speak, but when they looked at its pale, stern face and sad eyes, they saw that it was the good king who was dead. They were very much frightened, and one of them struck at the figure with his sword, but the sword touched nothing firmer than air, and the figure faded away into the darkness. Night after night, at the same hour, the soldiers guarding the castle saw this figure solemnly walking along the battlements. At last, one of them, who was Hamlet's greatest friend, told the prince what they had seen. That night, Hamlet went with the soldiers when they kept their watch. It was a bitter, cold night. At 12 o'clock, a great sound of music and of cannons firing told them that the bad king and his courtiers were drinking and holding revels in the castle. But when that noise died away, everything was still. There was no sound but that of the cold gray waves of the sea lashing on the rocks far down below. And then, from out of the darkness, came the tall figure in armor. The front of his helmet was raised, and Hamlet could see that it was his father's face that looked so sadly into his. The figure beckoned to Hamlet to follow, and Hamlet, who loved his father too much to feel afraid, followed him to a lonely part of the battlements. Then the ghostly king told his son that he was indeed his father, and how he had been cruelly murdered as he slept in the orchard. "You must revenge my murder," he said to Hamlet. And Hamlet, full of horror and rage and grief, swore that his father's death should be avenged. And as the pale dawn began to creep across the sea, the ghost vanished away like mist before the sun. Hamlet made the soldiers promise never by one sign or whisper to let anyone know what they had seen. "Swear," said the ghost's hollow voice from below. So they took an oath. "Swear!" again said the voice, and again, their hands on Hamlet's sword, the frightened soldiers did its bidding. "Oh, day and night, but this is wondrous strange," said Hamlet's friend. "There are more things in heaven on earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy," said Hamlet. All the gaiety and happiness seemed from that night to go out of Hamlet's heart. His father's death had made him very sad, but now he was sadder still, for he knew that his brave father had been cruelly murdered, and that the mother that he loved and who had always been so kind to him was a very wicked woman. He had promised his father too to avenge him. It all rested with him, and he had no one to share his secret. "The time is out of joint," he said. "Oh, cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right." It weighed so heavily on his mind that the king and queen noticed how much sadder he had become, and puzzled themselves to think what was wrong. They knew that in the days when his father lived and he was gay and happy, Hamlet had been very fond of a beautiful and gentle girl named Ophelia, the daughter of an old courtier. So when this courtier told them that he believed that Hamlet still loved Ophelia very much, and that much of his sadness was because he thought that Ophelia did not love him, they thought he must be right. "He behaves as if he were mad," they said to the old courtier. "He is mad for love of my daughter," said he. As Ophelia sat sewing in her room one day, Hamlet rushed in. His face was pale, his eyes staring, and his clothes untidy. He did not speak, but grasped her wrist and looked hard into her eyes and sighed and shook his head. He longed to tell her his secret, but he dared not do it, nor dared he even tell her of his love. So he left her, frightened and bewildered, and not knowing what had happened to the prince who was so dear to her. She told her father how strangely Hamlet had behaved, and he was more than ever sure that all his strangeness was just love for Ophelia. But it was because Hamlet did not know how best to keep his word to his father, nor how to punish the wicked king that he behaved so that people thought him mad. "I must be a coward," he said to himself, "a miserable, weak villain, a John o' Dreams who has no courage to avenge an evil deed." Sometimes he would fear that he had not really spoken with his father, but that the figure he had seen was a wicked spirit who only wanted to do him harm. There came one day to the castle a company of traveling players, and that gave him an idea to help him out of the trouble he was in. "The play's the thing," he said to himself. He went to the chief actor and asked him to act a play in which a wicked man killed his brother in just the same way in which Hamlet's father was murdered. He wrote some words for the actor to put in the play, and made up his mind that if, when he saw the play being acted, the king, his uncle, looked guilty and turned pale, the ghost must really have been his father's ghost, and the words that he spoke all true. The king and queen were pleased at seeing Hamlet appearing to forget his sadness for a little and to be interested in the acting. The play was acted in a big hall in the castle. The king and queen sat side by side, and Hamlet stayed near Ophelia. As the play went on, the king liked it less and less. When it came to the murder, "The king rises," said Ophelia to Hamlet. "What? Is he frightened with false fire?" said Hamlet. "What is the matter with my lord?" asked the queen. "Let the play be stopped," called Ophelia's father. "Give me some lights, away!" cried the king. "Lights, lights, lights!" cried everybody in confusion. So torches were brought, and the play was stopped, and everyone hurried away, the king with his guilty conscience going first of all. Here's an illustration. Who doesn't love pictures in a story? "What the ghost said was true. I know it now," said Hamlet. The king was furiously angry with Hamlet for his part in the play, and resolved to get rid of him. He arranged with two of his courtiers to go at once to England, taking Hamlet with him. When they got there, they were to give a letter from the king to the King of England, asking him to have Hamlet put to death at once. Hamlet's mother was also very angry with her son. She sent messengers to tell him to come and see her in her room before he went to bed. And Ophelia's old father hid himself behind the curtains in the queen's room to hear what the prince should have to say for himself. "Hamlet, you have much offended your father," said the queen. "Mother, you have much offended my father," said Hamlet, for he meant his own dear father, and she meant the wicked king. "Do you forget who I am?" asked the queen angrily. "No, indeed no," said Hamlet. "You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife. I wish you were not. You are my mother." The queen gave an angry answer. "Come, come, sit down," said Hamlet. "You shall not budge till I have showed you, as in a mirror, how bad a woman you are." This frightened the wicked queen. "Would you murder me?" she screamed. "Help! Help!" From behind the curtain, the old courtier also screamed, "Help! Help! Help!" "Is that a rat behind there?" said Hamlet, and with his sword he stabbed the curtain. "Oh, I am slain!" moaned the old man, and fell and died. "What have you done?" cried the queen. "I know not," said Hamlet. "Is it the king?" He lifted up the curtain, and there lay the old man, dead. "Oh, what a rash and bloody deed is this," said the queen. "A bloody deed? Almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother," was Hamlet's answer. "As kill a king?" repeated the frightened woman. Then Hamlet told his mother, in words that pierced her heart like daggers, all he knew of her wickedness. She begged him to say no more, and even as she spoke, the ghost of Hamlet's father entered. The good king reminded his son of his promise to avenge his death, and said some words of pity for his wicked wife. But the queen heard nothing and saw nothing, and when Hamlet told her that it was his father to whom he spoke, and pointed to the ghost as it stole away, she was quite sure her son was mad. Hamlet did as his father had told him, and patiently pleaded with his mother to leave the wicked murderer to whom she was married, and to show her sorrow for her sin. "Oh, Hamlet, you have broken my heart," said the queen. "I must be cruel only to be kind," said Hamlet. "Mother, good night." But nothing that Hamlet had said had been of any use. The queen went at once and told the king that Hamlet had killed Ophelia's father. The king told the two courtiers that Hamlet had murdered an old man and must be quite mad, and that they must that very night hurry him off to the ship that was ready to sail and only waiting for them. So Hamlet went away with them, and the king was glad because he thought he would never see Hamlet alive again. When Hamlet and the two courtiers were sailing across the sea to England, Hamlet's mind was so uneasy that he could not sleep or rest. He began to wonder what his wicked uncle had said of him in his letter to the King of England, and whether it might not be another plot. When the courtiers were asleep at night, he came up from his cabin and groped about in the dark till he found the letter. He opened it and read it, and found, in the king's own writing, a request that at once when Hamlet arrived in England, even before there was time to sharpen an axe, his head should be chopped off. Hamlet quickly wrote another letter that pretended to come from the King of Denmark to the King of England, asking him to put to death the two wicked courtiers who brought it. This he sealed with the seal that had belonged to his own father, and put back in the place he had found it. Next day, a pirate vessel chased the ship, and as the Danish ship could not sail fast enough to escape, it had to fight the pirate. Hamlet was the first man to rush on board, but the pirates at once sailed away, taking Hamlet as their prisoner. When they heard who he was, they treated him kindly and brought him safely back to Denmark. It was a sad day when he arrived there. Poor Ophelia, when she knew that Hamlet had slain her father, had gone away to England, went out of her mind. She wandered about, picking flowers and weeds and wreathing them in her hair and singing old songs. This is one of them. "How should I your true love know from another one? By his cockle hat and staff and his sandals shone. He is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone. At his head a grass-green turf, at his heels a stone. Ophelia had a brother, Laertes, who was in France when his father was slain. When he came back and found his father dead and his sister out of her mind, he believed it was the wicked king who had caused all this sorrow and led on the people to rebel against him. But the king lied to him and told him it was Hamlet who had murdered his father, and Hamlet whose cruelty had driven Ophelia mad. When the king heard that Hamlet had escaped and was on his way home, he plotted with Laertes, who was a good swordsman, that he should have a fencing match with Hamlet, as if in friendship, and should stab him with a sword dipped in deadly poison. But while her brother made plans to kill the man she loved, Ophelia wandered away to where a deep brook ran between the trees. A willow grew aslant it, hanging so closely over it that its silvery leaves were reflected in the water. With her arms full of garlands of weeds and of other wild flowers, daisies and nettles, columbines and fennel and crowflowers, and the long purple flower they used to call dead men's fingers. Ophelia came down to the water's edge. She wished in her poor mad mind to hang these garlands on a branch that drooped low over the brook, and to see the gay reflections of the flowers in the clear running water. But the branch she climbed on broke, and she fell in. For a little her clothes, floating on the water, kept her up, and as she floated she sang, like a lovely mermaid, snatches of old tunes. But soon the water closed over her, and unhappy, beautiful Ophelia was drowned. It was her funeral day when Hamlet came home, and by chance he came to the graveyard where she was to be buried. He watched from where he himself could not be seen as the funeral procession came forward. The king and queen were there, and Ophelia's brother Laertes, and many others. But when Laertes spoke of Ophelia by name, did Hamlet know whose body was going to be laid in the grave. Then his grief did nearly send him mad. He rushed forward and wished to be buried with her, but her brother gripped him by the throat, and they would have fought terribly had not others separated them. "I loved Ophelia," said Hamlet. 40,000 brothers with all their quantity of love could not make up the sum. But Hamlet, once his rage was over, was sorry for having treated Ophelia's brother roughly, and begged his pardon for what he had done, and for the sorrow he had caused him by accidentally slaying his father. "I have shot mine arrow o'er the house and hurt my brother," said Hamlet sorrowfully, meaning that although he had caused such sadness, he had meant no wrong. Ophelia's brother pretended to forgive him, and as proof that they were friends, they agreed to fence together. The wicked king said he thought Hamlet so clever a swordsman that he could easily beat Laertes, and he promised that the winner should be given a pearl, richer than any that had been worn by the last 4 kings of Denmark. So the 2 young men fought, and Hamlet made the first hit. A second time he also touched his opponent, and the queen, to do Hamlet honor, drank, before the king could stop her, from a poisoned cup of wine the king had put ready for Hamlet to drink. Meantime, Laertes had wounded Hamlet, and in the scuffle their swords were exchanged, and Hamlet also wounded him with the poisoned weapon. The blood from their wounds was flowing when the queen fell to the ground. "What is wrong with my mother?" called Hamlet. "She faints at the sight of the blood," said the king. "No, no," cried the dying queen. "It is the drink, the drink! Oh, my dear Hamlet, I am poisoned." And then she died. And Laertes, dying too, told Hamlet that it was the king who had put poison in the wine, and had caused poison to be put on the sword which has wounded him and Hamlet, so that they must both die. Then Hamlet, like a wounded lion, rushed in fury on the king, and with the poisoned sword he put an end to the murderer's wicked life. Laertes forgave Hamlet, and asked Hamlet to forgive him, and then died. Even as his breathing stopped, there came from without the sounds of marching soldiers and of guns. It was the army of Norway, whose prince had come to seize the crown of Denmark. Hamlet heard the sound and guessed what it meant, and was glad, for he knew the Prince of Norway and liked him for a gracious and good prince. Then, with his last breath, he sent a message to the new king of Denmark, and then, "The rest is silence," he said, and spoke no more. His faithful friend stood by him. "Now cracks a noble heart," he said. "Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." When the conqueror from Norway came and saw the dead bodies lying and heard the tale that Hamlet's friend had to tell, he had Hamlet's body carried away by 4 of his captains, like the body of a great general. A solemn march was played as they carried him, and guns were fired over his grave. So, like a soldier, ended Hamlet, who might have been a great and happy king had not the wickedness of others made him one of the most unhappy princes that ever lived. More Stories from Shakespeare Told to the Children by Jeanie Lang. See you for another video soon.